Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're investigating a real-world mystery that is, frankly, absolutely jaw-dropping. We're looking at a scenario where a massive, life-changing investment just vanished. Poof, gone overnight. And you know what the most incredible part is? It wasn't because of some stock market crash or a natural disaster. No, it was a completely calculated administrative sequence of events. So we're going to break down exactly how this happened. We'll dissect the documents, the timeline, and the specific laws that made this entire vanishing act possible. Okay, let's dive into this. $1 million. Think about that for a second. That is the staggering debt that Sunny and Jatika Sharma took on back in 2015 to buy a 7-Eleven franchise in Kensington, which is a suburb in Sydney's east. They took out this hefty loan from ANZ just to cover the upfront goodwill and those initial franchising fees. I mean, they invested a massive amount of capital, essentially betting their entire family's financial future on the success of this really well-known convenience brand. And they literally spent a decade running the store, building up a super loyal customer base, and just pouring their sweat equity into the business day in and day out. But despite all of that massive investment and a decade of really hard work, they were recently forced to walk out of their store with absolutely zero compensation. I mean, nothing. Nada. So the crucial question we're answering today and what we're calling our legal autopsy is this. How do successful business owners lose everything perfectly legally? Seriously, how does a system operate that allows an investment of over $1 million to just be wiped off the board without breaking a single law? Let's unpack the corporate mechanics behind this. Section 1, $1 million loss. So to really get the mechanics of this, we need to look at the timeline. The inciting incident, if you will. The Sharma's journey started in 2015 when they signed a 10-year agreement. But as that 10-year expiration date started creeping up in early 2024, they got a notification from 7-Eleven Corporate. The company declined to renew their store agreement. Their reason? The operational performance of the store. Now, keep in mind, this was not their first rodeo, right? The Sharmas had already successfully bought and sold 2 other 7-Eleven stores over nearly 2 decades. They knew what they were doing. But this time, they were told to hand over the keys by June 2024, and the human toll here is just immense. Jyotika Sharma reported suffering from severe continuous migraines from the stress, just agonizing over how they're going to possibly make their next mortgage repayment after walking away with zero return on $1 million investment. When 7-Eleven dropped this news, they presented the Sharmas with what kind of looked like a choice. Option A, find a buyer for the store before the lease expires, or Option B, walk away with nothing. Now, on the surface, this looks like standard business practice, doesn't it? If you can't renew, you just sell your asset. They were even granted 2 extensions, which pushed their deadline to find a buyer all the way to June of this year. So it really seemed like head office was giving them a totally fair runway to recoup their money. Section 2, the blocked buyer. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is where we hit our major plot twist, because the Sharmas actually did find a highly motivated buyer. Enter Deepti Pundir from Sydney. Just look at her resume. She is not a novice at all. She worked as a duty store manager at Aldi for 5 years. She knows retail, she knows team management, and she's dealing with customers daily. And financially, she was rock solid. She just sold an investment property in January specifically to free up capital for this exact purchase, and she was already pre-approved for a bank loan. By literally any conventional metric, she is a franchisor's absolute dream applicant to take over an established site. But let's look at how 7-Eleven handled her application. It's a completely bizarre sequence. Step 1, she submits her formal application. Step 2, she's rejected the very next day, literally 24 hours later. Step 3, believing there must be some sort of mistake or administrative oversight, she reapplies. Step 4, corporate actually grants her a virtual interview. Progress, right? But then, Step 5, the final denial comes through. And the kicker here? They gave absolutely no reason for the rejection. None. Ms. Pundir spent 3 months preparing for this, only to be shut down. And because 7-Eleven head office completely denied her application, the Sharma's option A evaporated entirely, which violently forced them into option B, walking away with nothing. Section 3, the franchise power dynamic. So you're probably wondering, how on earth can a corporation wield this kind of unilateral power over an independent business owner's sale? Well, it all comes down to how the system is actually structured. See, in the 7-Eleven model across Australia, individual operators buy the rights to operate under the brand's really strict guidelines. But the financial flow is highly centralized. The head office actually holds the lease and covers the store rent. In exchange for that, head office takes more than 50%, the lion's share of the gross profit from the franchisee. So the franchisee relies entirely on the parent company to renew their operational rights just to keep their share of the money coming in.
And to really put that power dynamic into perspective, just look at this contrast. On one side of the equation, you've got the Sharmas facing complete and utter financial ruin with over $1 million in debt. On the other side, you have the parent company. Just a few months ago, in April 2024, 7-Eleven International bought out the Australian arm of the business for a staggering $1.71 billion. It's the ultimate David versus Goliath scenario, guys. When Goliath says no to your buyer, and you don't have the millions needed to hire corporate lawyers, your options just vanish.
Section 4. Perfectly legal, perfectly unfair. Which brings us to the absolute core paradox of our legal autopsy today. It feels incredibly wrong, right? But according to the experts, it's perfectly legal. This quote summarizes the entire situation perfectly. It comes from UNSW Emeritus Professor Dr. Jenny Buchan, who literally specializes in franchise law. She states plainly, what's happened isn't fair, but the law's not fair. Dr. Buchan points out that franchisees are just inherently vulnerable when their lease term comes to an end. Once that contract expires, the franchisor holds all the cards. They have the absolute right to take the site back. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, wait a minute, isn't there some sort of regulation protecting the franchisee here? Well, yes and no. Because this is a petrol station, it falls under the jurisdiction of the oil code. And the oil code dictates that a supplier, in this case 7-Eleven Corporate, cannot unreasonably withhold consent to the transfer of a business to a new buyer. Okay, that sounds like exactly the protection the Sharmas needed when they brought Deep Pundir to the table, right? But the oil code doesn't exist in a vacuum. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where the system tilts. We have to look at the overarching Franchising Act, which contains what Dr. Buchan calls a gigantic escape clause. You see, while there's this general obligation for parties to act in good faith, the Act explicitly states that this does not prevent a franchisor from acting in their own legitimate commercial interests. Dr. Buchan notes that franchisors lobbied incredibly hard to keep this huge loophole in the legislation. And it effectively overrides the good faith provision whenever corporate decides that taking the store back is just better for their bottom line. So why? Why would they want to block a perfectly qualified buyer? Well, look at this incredibly candid assessment from Dr. Buchan. It's a very cheap way of acquiring a business for head office. We really have to look at the cold, impartial reality of the commercial incentives here. The Sharmas spent 10 years building up the goodwill and a really strong customer base at that Kensington store. By refusing to renew the lease and then blocking the sale to a new franchisee, the head office gets to take over a successful, fully established site for free. It just goes right into their corporate network. Commercially, it's a massive win for the corporation, even if it leaves the local operator with absolutely nothing. Now, for their part, 7-Eleven did provide a statement saying they don't comment on individual matters, but that they, quote, approach all franchisee matters in a fair and considered way. Section 5. A systemic problem. So, the big question, is this just one isolated dispute in one specific suburb, or are we looking at a wider pattern here? Well, according to the reporting, the Kensington store is definitely not an isolated incident. There are some severe systemic red flags. Jadika Sharma alleges she has spoken to over 20 other franchise families across the country who have been destroyed in the exact same manner. And following the media inquiries into this story, 7-Eleven reportedly issued an email reminding franchisees of their media policy, which essentially ordered them not to engage with the press. And if you're wondering, hey, where is the government regulator in all this? The ACCC encourages businesses to report concerns, but they explicitly state their role does not extend to investigating individual or contractual disputes. They literally won't step in on behalf of individual consumers or businesses. So these families are just left fighting a multi-billion-dollar corporation completely on their own. Which leaves us staring at the stark reality of this whole legal autopsy. We have a system where legitimate commercial interests are legally prioritized over the livelihood of the small business owners who actually built the brand on the ground. When the law allows a corporation to absorb $1 million investment for free, leaving everyday families with crushing debt and severe stress, we really have to ask, where do we draw the ethical line in modern franchising? It's a question that absolutely every prospective franchisee needs to ask themselves before they ever sign on the dotted line. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this structured look at the facts and the law behind them has helped clarify a truly complex and devastating business reality. Catch you next time.